Everyone, and welcome back to the Football Forecast, and in today's video I'll be going through my top 10 worst signings for the season. If you enjoy this, it'd be great to subscribe to your channel as well as liking the video. So I'm going to start off with my number 10, which is James Trafford to Manchester City. Now the reason why this isn't any higher, because James Trafford basically just turned into the number 2 keeper, and he's a very competent number 2 keeper, and that's because they brought a new keeper in Donnarumma and sold Edison for a very good fee, which I think sort of rectifies his transfer, and you can more look at it as a backup keeper signing for James Trafford. If this was the first choice signing and he would perform like he did in the first 2 games, and he was struggling to not get in the side to another keeper who was actually designed to be the second choice, and I think we'd be looking at a much worse signing. But the fact that Donnarumma came in and he's done a really good job, I think sort of saves the James Trafford signing to Manchester City. Someone else I did consider for number 10 was also Ian Nori for Manchester City as well, who has basically come in, and Nico Riley, a young sort of kid who's been playing really well in fairness, has taken his spot from the side. I actually saw this coming. I never thought Ian Nori would really work in the City system because I thought he was too weak defensively. Number 9, I've actually broken my rules a little bit. I've done 2 signings together, and this is because it's the 2 signings of Gittins and Garnacho. 2 players that haven't been absolutely awful. I'd say Garnacho's been better than Gittins, and at points have offered a threat. But how I look at this is the fact that they spent 100 million on these 2 together. So I wanted sort of 100 million worth of sort of talent back, or ability back from what I've seen so far, and I haven't seen that at all. Garnacho's offered, as I said, some threats at points, but sort of maximum, I would say those 2 together are probably worth 50 million, half of what they paid. And I really just never understood this business, and that's sort of what's been proven. I really think they were better off going buying sort of a Yildiz, a Rodrigo, a talented winger, which was definitely available for 100 million. And then you could use Tyreek George, Pedro Neto as the backup left winger when needed. And I think that would have been a way more effective way to use this money. That is going to be a theme, because I'm actually going to criticise some of the signings sort of based off what I thought they could have done instead. And that's what I thought they could have done instead. And I think that's been proven that would be a better option. Buy 1 quality player instead of 2 young players that may turn out to be good players. Number 8, I've got another player that now doesn't start for his side, and that is Ghassan at Aston Villa. Ghassan came in, there was some hope for the winger, £30 million, and he's been absolutely terrible throughout, nowhere near where he needed to be, and he's now nowhere near the starting 11. John McGinn starts off the right, and he's basically down as one of the last choice options that they use. Very low in confidence. He really struggled at the start of the season, and they're a lot better side without him. I think people miss out the signing because people forget that he actually played at the start of the season, how bad he really was, and the fact that they actually spent a lot of money on Ghassan, and he really hasn't been worth it so far. Number 7, I've got Omari Hutchinson. Omari Hutchinson's actually been alright so far, but he needs to be a lot better than alright to justify a record transfer fee for Nottingham Forest, and he needs to be starting by now. And I never understood the signing. He wasn't even registered for the Europa League squad at the start, and he's just nowhere near being good enough for what they paid for him, and that is how this is going to work. The transfer fee is going to play a huge factor in how I rank these signings. So if they spent sort of 15-20 million on Hutchinson, I'd say, oh, okay, that's all right business. It's the fact they spent so much money on a player that's actually been nowhere near good enough. Moving into number 6, I've got Mads Hermansen to West Ham. A player that started so poorly for West Ham, made huge amount of mistakes, and really put West Ham on the back foot from the start of the season. His ability to claim corners was tragic, especially in that Chelsea game, and he was just awful, and they've looked like a better side with Areola in it, and that's why it's such a poor signing. And I don't really think Areola's an excellent keeper. I don't think he's good enough for West Ham, really, and the fact he got dispossessed by them is a real problem, and that's sort of what I look at. I think West Ham have got a keeper that's actually probably not quite at the standard that they need, and this is why it's a poor signing, because Areola can make mistakes, which we've seen, which could cost West Ham in the future, and it could actually send West Ham down. It could be a real mistake that West Ham made signing Hermansen last summer. So then at number 5, I've got Milos Kerkez. And look, Kerkez recently I think has been pretty good as a player, but this first part of the season he's been really poor on the ball. Still, he's still making mistakes. I think how Liverpool are using him is actually why I've ranked Kerkez in 5th. Kerkez was signed as a player that should be playing as like an attacking wing back, and for a lot of the season his position Kerkez has spent quite a lot of time as one of the centre halves, and I think that that's just sort of why Kerkez has struggled to settle in at Liverpool so much, as well as this Robertson at points has looked a lot more solid than Kerkez. The last sort of 5 games though, Kerkez has definitely improved, and I think if we did this sort of a couple of games ago, maybe I would have him sort of third, maybe in that top 3 of worst signings so far this season. But I think the fact that he's starting to play well, I managed to put him outside the top 5. And it wasn't a huge fee for Kirk. He's about 35 million. I think a very good fee for a young fullback and of such a big talent. So then at number 4, I think this is going to cause some anger from a certain Arsenal fan base. I've got Victor Gyökeres at number 4. I really think he's been a poor signing for Arsenal, and the reason why he's actually 4th isn't just because he hasn't been where he's needed to be so far in terms of sort of getting the goals for Arsenal. It's actually the fact that I never thought the signing would work, and I just still can't understand why Arsenal made this deal happen. And I think that's been resulted in sort of how he's been playing, and I really think Arteta's system's not getting the best out of a striker like Gyökeres, and I just still can't understand why they made this signing. When I look at strikers that I think work in Arteta's system, I either look at a striker that can link up, play well, and sort of play sort of a transitional striker. And if you look at this, has worked for players like Gabriel Jesus. I thought he was excellent when Jesus stays fit. He's a brilliant player for Arsenal, and that got the best out of the wingers at the time, which was Saka and Martinelli. Or it's a striker up front that's very good in the air, which has worked in the past. So your Marinos, your Havertz. Havertz also was very good at linking up play. That sort of striker. And that's why I think the signing is so poor, because Gyökeres isn't excellent at either of this. He's not actually that good in the air, and he's not a good striker when it sort of comes into dropping in and linking up play, and he's not very mobile, which I think Arteta really needed in his a striker signing. The only sort of use Gyökeres has is basically, and I think if you look at sort of where is Gyökeres actually at his best, it's either from the penalty spot or it's actually sort of in a counter-attacking system. Arsenal don't get chances to play on the counter-attack because teams sit in a low block against them, because of course they do, because Arsenal are a quality side. And I actually think they're more of a threat when you put your Marinos, your Havertz, your Jesuses up front. And that's why I think it's so poor. I think Arsenal should have got a completely different striker that actually works in the system Arteta already had, and I think he'd be so much more effective than Victor Gyökeres. As well as this, they've spent £63 million on a player that's not been nearly as good enough as he needs to be, and he's 27 years old, so it's unlikely he's going to be able to develop into an excellent striker, and I just can't see this signing work. That's why I've got Victor Gyökeres in 4th. Oh, then in 3rd place, I've got Newcastle's Anthony Elanga. Elanga's been really poor, and there were high expectations for Anthony Elanga. I actually really rate Anthony Elanga as a player, so I'm disappointed to see him struggling like this, and he's just nowhere near as good as he needs to be. I still think there's a player there, and I think once teams maybe attack Newcastle a bit more, maybe there'll be more chances on the counter-attack. But this comes back to the sort of original point I've had for a lot of these signings of he's coming to replace Jacob Murphy, and Jacob Murphy, it's still, I think, a better option than Elanga on that right-hand side, and he really needs to improve to justify £55 million, and it's a massive fee for a player that's really underperformed so far. But then at number 2, I've got Florian Wirtz. Wirtz is definitely not the second worst player on this list or the second worst signing in terms of player performances, but it is that transfer fee. Wirtz had to be really good to really justify the transfer fee so far. Do I think this transfer will work out? Absolutely. I think Wirtz is a fantastic player, and I think every game he looks like a different player, looks like a better player for Liverpool, and I have no doubts that he will be a great signing. The signing is one, based off what I've seen so far, this has to be one of the worst signings. I think the difference with some of these other ones though is I actually see Wirtz succeeding at Liverpool eventually. I don't know if it'll be this season, but I think eventually Wirtz will get up to where he needs to be, as he is a brilliant footballer. So then at number 1, I think everyone has this number 1. I've got Alexander Isak. So far, not been where he needs to be. Hugo Ekitike is now starting over Isak, and it looks like he may have a potential ACL injury. I'm not quite sure yet. This was being recorded sort of just after the Spurs game, where Isak actually scored, which is a good finish by Isak, but he also has just potentially picked up very much a long-term injury, and that is a massive concern for Isak, as he hasn't really started brilliantly for Liverpool, and so far he's not justified a British transfer record, and that is the problem for Isak, as well as I've already mentioned Florian Wirtz and number 2. They're not justifying the massive transfer fee. Once again, Isak's not going to be the worst player on this list, and I could still definitely see the Isak transfer working out, because I think it can work. It's just the fact that so far you just have to put him in first place. It's really that simple. So let me know your thoughts on the top 10 worst signings. What changes would have you made to my list? This was mainly based off what I've seen so far, but I also took into account if I felt like the signing was obviously going to fail. For example, Jokeris, I never felt that was going to succeed, and I thought it was obvious why they shouldn't have made that signing. Your Barragan/Garnacho one, those sort of signings as well have also been marked down for that reason. If you enjoy this, it would be great to subscribe to the channel as well as liking the video.